today's discussion, and we have been talking about this for quite some time in terms of connecting from your business, from your business strategy, and making sure that your big data and your data science is heading in the right direction. And part of that is making sure that we got the right metrics and the right measurements. But in a discussion I had the other day, I was quite surprised as to how active people are in having these metrics defined. Now, I'm not sure the exact reason, but I found that quite interesting in terms of doing a lot of the data science, but then not having it aligned with all the metrics within the business. So let's get going. So the first thing I wanted to, so these are the different frameworks. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of it. I'll do a poll just now. Here's the Balanced Scorecard. This is objective key results. You may have seen that in terms of Twitter, Google. These are the guys that have started with this in almost the last 2 years. I've seen that creeping up. The North Star metric also just coming about, and the one metric that matters. Then we get into pirate metrics, and the latest bit of work that's coming out, I don't know if you've read about that, is jobs to be done, and that comes more in the UX, but also in the marketing. So basically, what jobs to be done is saying is that if you design a product, what jobs are you helping people complete? So if your product is not helping people complete the job, then they may be on there for a while, but that's not going to keep them in the long run. So I wonder, and I'm hoping you guys can see this. If you wouldn't mind just connecting onto Menti and typing in the code 696755. And I just wanted to get some feedback from you guys in terms of what measurement frameworks have you made use of? What measurement frameworks is your company, have you heard of, and things like that, just so that I can get an understanding of what the level of understanding, what your level of experience is. So if you go to menti.com and you type in 896755, I'd love to hear from you in terms of which measurement framework you're currently using. Okay. Ah, nice. Okay, so it seems like I'm really interested to hear from the person that's on the jobs to be done. I've just seen it coming onto them, becoming in the literature, people really talking about it. I think similar to the other group, the Balanced Scorecard is something that we've been working on for many years. I think almost I experienced this the first time with Microsoft when they bought out SQL Server reporting services. They had a Balanced Scorecard. So I really have seen a lot of that. So nice to see people working on jobs to be done. That's quite interesting. All right, great. So thanks for that. Now getting back to the discussion, when we've gone through the measurement frameworks, I then want to just connect us back. I think the last time we spoke about, Drew, if you just correct me, we spoke about the data sophistication, and then we spoke about how do we answer all the questions. What happened? Why did it happen? What will happen? What should I do? And what don't I know?
Yeah, we started to focus on what will happen and also what I should do, yes, being the prescriptive and the predictive metrics.
Right. And what we're trying to do is that when you get the right set of metrics, and that's always a tricky one, it's not easy to get those right set of metrics, then the questions and the answers and the decisions become a lot more focused. So you basically, with your metrics, wherever it may be, your balanced scorecard, you're actually having to answer all of the situation around those metrics. Okay, so if you've got the metric, you've got the framework down, you've got them all coming all the way down to each project, each department, each product, then you can really spend time working on answering these questions. Okay, so this is part of basically a training that we provide. We call it business decision-making sophistication. We look at 3 areas of sophistication, being the value sophistication to the business, the measurement sophistication, so it's important to get our measurements right, and then the decision sophistication. All right, so our focus is, the talk is on this area. And just to say, guys, that if you're sitting with a data disabled or you've got lots of distrust, it's quite hard to bring people into this journey and to start moving them along the decision cycle. And you need to spend a bit of time dealing with those issues and getting the distrust sorted out. So don't try bring this into an organization and you're sitting with a high level of distrust. You've actually got to work, and there's quite some time to get to an area where you can start building the trust. But one of the key points that really led me to start preparing this, and certainly with some of the engagements with my customers, McKinsey brought out a really nice article, and they measured some of the top companies, and what they found was that the high-performing companies are able to make decisions promptly and well. That's a quote from their side. Whereas the companies that don't perform, they have a high level of disagreement. And yesterday we were having this discussion about certainly how different countries have dealt with COVID, are able to deal with COVID. And you can certainly see in countries that have strong control and very little disagreement. It's not to say there's no disagreement, and I'm not saying that they have a lot of options, but things start to happen faster. Everybody toes the line, everybody submits to that authority, and you don't get this massive debate and arguing left and right and arguing about the data. And it's quite an interesting discussion, because it's a case of a lot of us are talking about diversity, that diversity helps, but that disagreement doesn't help. So that was quite an interesting discussion. Does anyone have any comments on that or discussion points?
It sounds makes sense to me, Howard. I think it's also when people are disagreeing, what are they disagreeing with? Are they disagreeing with the content, with the metric, or are they disagreeing because of a personal belief?
Or there's a lack of trust in the data, and certainly the way in which we present something, the way in which we try to make the decisions, we either not having a good understanding of what these decisions are about, and the data is not strong enough, or we're not seeing the data. And so we get into lots of these agree and disagree type of scenarios. And we know what happens when you try to convince an organization and there's lots of disagreement. The amount of time that it can take is intense. All right. Okay, so moving on. So the 3 that are the real focus in terms of frameworks that I've been working on, and the jobs to be done. As I said, that's a new one coming in. I'd love to hear from the person who would work on jobs to be done in terms of what sort of framework that is putting together. I understand the principle, but I haven't used it. So there are the OKRs, and we can see a few people on. We then have Balanced Scorecard and North Star. So those are the 3 that I can really talk to and compare. And it's the BSC, the Balanced Scorecard is very intense. You got the OKR, and they're tools, they're measurement tools. And I keep saying to people is that I don't really mind how and which framework they use, it's really about the case of, guys, have you got the metrics? So you don't have to call it OKRs. I do find that it's helpful to explain what's part of that metric and what you can expect from the metric. But it's the important thing is that we are measuring the business goals, we're measuring towards a business target. Now, what's also important, it doesn't mean that these things contradict each other. So I've had an experience where I've actually used both Balanced Scorecard, OKR, and I've been able to get lots of benefit out of that as well. All right. So if we just give you guys a quick introduction, I think it does help. So the Balanced Scorecard is a management and strategy framework. And these are the key areas: learning and growth, customers, financial data, and internal business processes. And then we have strategy that sits across all four of them. Now, one takes every single area and works somewhat independently, but then there's also a roll up across and up and down. Typically up, that I see the way I've done it, is you have learning and growth, and that's almost the individual and the organizational memory. And then that rolls up into internal business processes, which rolls up in some cases to customers and then to financial data. But I've seen people turn it around. So they go business process, financial data, and customers. An example of that would be a regulator where they're not there to make a profit. And we changed these names from customer to stakeholder. Okay, so we would then go learning and growth, business process, financial data, stakeholders. We still have to understand what that financial data is. So this is analyzed through the investigation of knowledge resources and training, sometimes referred to as internal processes for the business processes. And then you evaluate how well your products are manufactured, and that includes operational management. We have customers or customer perspectives, and this part gauges the customer satisfaction with price. And of course, this is dependent on your value discipline, but that's part of the value sophistication that we talk about in detail as well. So if some of you would like to hear about the value sophistication in terms of choosing a discipline, choosing the operating model, and then it's choosing what's important to you. So is it operational excellence? Is it customer satisfaction or customer intimacy, or is it product excellence? So product leadership. So it depends on which one you want to go, and that determines what your North Star is going to be as well, right?
Howard, do you buy into the fact that you could have a combination of those depending who the metric is intended for?
Are you talking about a combination of metrics, or are you talking about a combination of value disciplines?
So the value discipline, yeah, you rattled off a couple of that. So
Drew, I don't actually. The more I spend on it, the more time. You've got so many different changes, and when you look at all aspects, almost down to culture, and maybe just to give you an example of how these things are so different from a cultural point of view that it makes it hard to have two as your North Star or as your most important. Now, what I'm not saying is that you can't ignore all of the other things. So if you are customer intimacy, you can't ignore operational excellence, right? You can't be a slacker at doing operational stuff. And same with the other things.
Fine, but if you, for instance, are the marketing team that are tasked with growing the customer base and customer satisfaction, you rely on other people for that operational excellence. So they might be getting marked on that while you're getting marked on your customer retention.
So you'll find that you'll be marked on all of them, but what's important, what does the culture come out? So maybe to have that discussion, if I'm a customer intimacy, that's my culture, then what you'll do is that you will allow the customer to almost dictate some of the products, right? and you will build products around customer. And you see that with lots of the banks where they've almost unraveled some of their big products and they're now coming down to features, and they'll allocate it. So if a customer wants this, then they'll give the customer that. So it's almost like the customer is always right. That's taking it a bit too far, but they'll do anything to satisfy and service the customer. Whereas if you're product leadership, your main goal, and everybody is trying to find people and build a customer that excels in the product, in areas of the product. And if you're operational excellence, then you're not really that fast in terms of providing the best product. What you are doing is saying, what is the best product for the best price? And in that situation, you're not going to always address the high range customers with specialized needs and stuff like that. You're trying to get inventory turns. So operational excellence refers a lot to inventory turns. So how much scale, how much throughput and movement can I get in my business? And operational excellence takes a very strong leadership, and everybody does everything in unity. So the vision has got to be bought in, whereas in customer intimacy, it's almost you're now feeding off the customer and you're there to support the customer. So you can almost turn around and say, it doesn't really matter what products we've got. If we are helping the customer survive or achieve, and we go and find an alternative product for them to meet that requirement, then that's okay. Where the others contradict that. Is that making a bit more sense?
Yep, it does. Yeah.
So if you follow, and the important thing is, it's not to say if you customer intimacy that you're bad on your operations or your products are rubbish and you don't have any products. And it's the same with the others. But what you will find is that you'll push the one dimension and you'll get people. And we know that, for example, with product support, if you're pushing the product, the people that you bring in, the approach to the product, that's everything. You almost create an ecosystem around how you enhancing technology, how you're getting technology to do things, and people will follow you because of that. That's not always the case when you go customer intimacy, right? That's you got to be listening to the customer. So I find it very hard to deal with all of them and have all of them as my main priority. I certainly don't have an example. All right. Let's go on. So the next one is OKR. Now, OKR is an interesting one, and it actually came out of an understanding that this balanced scorecard is just too hard to keep going. People would be refreshing the scorecards, refreshing the targets on a continual basis. When they didn't make them, they just almost let them fall and things like that. And so it was really designed to prevent that and to have a more of an agile approach. Okay, so OKR is defining the strategic priorities of a business, and it considers two components. Objective, what is the global overarching goal that your organization strives to achieve, and the key results, and measurable achievements, and it's where you want to get and how you're going to get there. Okay, so those are the two questions that you're focusing on. And here's some examples of an OKR. So here's an objective: grow our corporate global business, and key results are hit company sales with 100 million in sales, achieve 100% year-on-year sales growth, increase the company average deal size, reduce churn to less than 5% annually. Okay, so that's an example of an OKR. And if you just look at that compared to the balanced scorecard, that I've got to look at every single area, everywhere from learning through to revenue and finance, the differences are massive. Okay. Any questions on the OKR?
It doesn't look like it.
what it does, what I do find with OKR is that and I've cut out some slides here that I used, is it's almost, what are you going to achieve in the next period? Okay, so it's a lot more agile in terms of balanced scorecard, that they design it almost for 3 years. This was what you're going to do in the next period. Now, unfortunately, when I've listed these OKRs, there's been nothing. There is one there in Q4. Okay, so OKR certainly has a time period that hasn't been shown in this scenario. But that is one of the big differences. It's almost, what are we going to do within the next period or the next 2 periods? We don't have these long-running OKRs. Okay, so then we have what we refer to as the North Star. And just to give you an example, Spotify's North Star at this stage, they call it listening hours. And what's critical about the North Star is that it is more vital. It's a key aspect that's more vital than any other metric. Okay, and the single metric best reflects the core value. According to this methodology, to reach success, a company must identify its North Star or area of business and focus on developing it first and foremost. Okay, so Spotify introduced something called listening hours, and the important thing about that listening, the North Star, that listening hours, is that everyone can relate to. Okay, so it's everyone from HR to wherever it is, they have their understanding on how they can affect the North Star. Okay, and then this works in conjunction with the one metric that matters, and it rolls down into organization, department, project, and then there's also the pirate funnel as well. Okay, so your teams understand what needs to be done, what's important for your organization, and how they can align their efforts onto it. So you can see this is similar to the balanced scorecard, but different to the OKR. The OKR doesn't have this hierarchy, and they don't have how this one flows into that one. It's just about, this is what we've got to achieve, and the teams are left to find their way and connect to what how they're going to help achieve it. Focusing on a single key area will let you clearly see the progress in your projects and their impact, which in turn will create a feedback loop and accelerate your initiatives. Accountability, the North Star holds the product accountable to an outcome. Okay, so I've been working quite hard on developing a North Star for 2 customers at the moment, one being myself, and the other one, this regulator. And the interesting thing that we talk about is when you design a North Star, here's an 8-step process, is when does the customer reach the end result? And the end result is almost to say, when do they reach satisfaction? It's not to say that they won't get more and more demanding, or they will stop using you once they've got the end result. And that's sort of in line with the jobs to be done. This job has to be done repeatedly. This job has to be done on several occasions. And you have to be able to measure when that end result is achieved. So the North Star, it's close to the moment that the customer gets the intended result from your product. Okay, now that's quite important. And maybe to give you a simple idea of that, and when I apply that to a training company, the customer gets the end result not just when they do the training, but when they get the recognition. Okay, and different people want different levels of recognition. Some people want a certification like CDMP. Some people want a recognition in terms of financial, recognition in terms of a role, being a data architect. That's what they're looking for. So depending on what your recognition is, it's when you get to that recognition. It's not just the fact that I did a CDMP for certification and then I take 6 months to write the exam. It's the North Star is when you write the exam and when you can say, I'm a CDMP. All right, and expresses value to all customers. So it forces you to look at all the pirate metrics, and I'll give you a little bit of example there. The moment is measurable for us. So you can't have a North Star that you can't measure. right? You've got to have something that you can measure, and the biggest problem is if your North Star is at the end. For example, in some cases, we spoke to one company and they talk about lifelong learning. So I asked them, when is the end and when can you measure it? Is that at the end of your life and then you can measure it, or how do you measure that on an interim basis? Okay. And then what's the frequency of measurement, right? So if you can't measure down to a month at least, then you're going to have a problem linking all of your data, and you're going to get into some challenges with this frequency. I remember working on a customer. They were a trucking company, and they went into a contract to ship or truck sugarcane. And the final measurement was at the end of the year. The year before, they had done a fantastic, they almost made in the region of 6 million rand, and this was 10, 15 years ago. And when they wiped their eyes at 6 months later, they were down 3 million rand because of just the lack of performance and the challenges with the rain and things like that. And they were unable to measure it, and they only got their first measurement in at 6 months, and then it was a disaster. And now they had to look at, well, how do we stop the bleeding, and how do we stop this from getting doubled, down 12 million rand? So they had a difference from sort of what they wanted to achieve. Their budget was, and their target was 10 million, and they were down 6 million. So that was pretty embarrassing. So the frequency is critical. And then you've got to understand this one is the external factor of minimal impact. So you can't be dependent on some other factor outside in the industry to achieve it. If you do that, your North Star is going to be hard to control, and it must reflect your business growth. Okay, so this is, you guys, if you want to, you can look through the notes and the presentation, but this is a way in which you can help validate that your North Star is measurable and you've got the data to be able to respond to it. Okay, so here's the Spotify North Star, and it's called time spent listening to music. The shortening of that is listening hours, and these are the input metrics. Bring users back more often, increase time spent per session. So how long are you listening to Spotify for? New art, and these are some of the things that they're bringing: new artist notification, recommendations, creating playlists, and discovering new songs. Okay, so that's one company that's done very well with a North Star. Now you can see that.
Question now, it'd be interesting to see if TikTok have got something similar, because they really do want to get maximum airtime,
Yes.
maximum your airtime.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they roll it down, and they bring these metrics down into the organization and how they start to measure it. Okay, so one of the interesting things that we talk about is external variables, people listening on Sonos or loudspeaker outside their sphere of influence that they can't control. Yeah, so I will certainly look at that, Drew, to see if TikTok, what approach they're using. Now, the pirate funnel is an interesting approach in terms of it's used typically to measure product performance, but it's not just product performance. So, for example, you can also apply this to your customer life cycle. Okay, so for example, making your customers aware of who you are and what you do, acquiring them, retention, your life cycle value, and stuff like that. So you may, if you customer intimacy, then your product step behind, and it's not just it's one product you could have multiple products, and how is each product doing on this pirate funnel. And these are the steps within the pirate funnel. Now, the lovely thing about the pirate funnel is this, that as you do the measurement of data across these different areas, you can start seeing where the biggest bottleneck is, okay? So there I've got the one metric that matters. My bottleneck is moving from revenue to retention. So what we're saying here is that these guys were able to sign people up, but the retention in terms of the subsequent year on re-signing them they weren't doing very well, and they had lots of dropouts over there. But those that did stay, they had good referral rates. The activation was slick, but their problem, or their bottleneck problem, is 10%. So indirectly, it is saying that the customer lifetime value was very short, their churn was high, and they weren't able to convert people to subsequent years of listening or engaging with the product. Okay. Any questions on the North Star, or the one metric that matters? All right. So what is important is understanding how to use these different frameworks. And I think, as I said in the beginning, you don't have to stick to one framework blindly. You can make a combination. You can help them. You can apply them at their strengths. And this I can certainly speak for. I built a data management operating model for a customer, and they asked me to put the metrics together. And initially, I wasn't sure which metric was important to them, because it's not just about how many business terms in my glossary do I have, or how many data models have I produced. That's not business value, right? So I had to connect it to the business value. And that was the hard part. And especially when you're coming in from the outside and you're not always aware of what's driving them. So I found that using the Balanced Scorecard, all of those different areas forced me to go and talk to people and understand, for example, the stakeholders, what is important to them. Okay, so what about data management is important to them? So how do I get that right value to them? And of course, they didn't have any customers. They just regulate on that side. So regulatory burden was an issue to them, but it was a different level of discussion. And when I took it down all of those different levels in terms of my stakeholder, financial, the internal processes, now we know that's part of the DM book, gives you those DM processes, and then your training. So I could then go and specify on every level, I could specify the measurements that I needed to do, but it scaled quite big, right? So I've got 11 knowledge areas. I then had metrics per knowledge area. I then had training per roles in that area. And after a while, I had close on 200, 300 metrics that I had to keep together in a balanced scorecard. It worked out pretty nicely, but it took a long time, right? So that guy was no joke. But the amazing thing was what I learned in the process. Okay, in talking to people, in understanding that, in understanding what's important to measure, this Balanced Scorecard was phenomenal in that. And you can see that by, if I just looked at the OKR and saying, well, okay, give me a one-liner in terms of what my objective is. My objective is to increase the maturity of data management. Fantastic. By what and how am I going to do it? And it's okay, so these things are quick, but you don't realize all of the things. And then how do you tie it to people? How do you tie it to organizational memory? How do you tie it to the metadata department or the data quality COE and stuff like that? You just battle to do those connections. Is that making sense for you guys? Am I maybe talking nonsense, or anyone can relate to it?
I buy it. No problem at all.
Okay. So
what about some of you other guys?
What about, sorry, I just rushed along. Andrew?
Or Willem? Andrew, Connie, Lawrence?
No comments from this side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, all good here.
Right.
Yeah.
So the OKR is the agile one. It's very quick. It's very transparent. It's great motivation when coupled to acceptance of failure. That was designed for the agile environment. So you've got to be careful when you set these metrics. You also create a bad culture. You can create a bad culture. And I remember working in a UK company, and the CEO then identified that his salespeople really liked playing darts and league tables and stuff like that. So we set up a measurement system. who got the highest sales, and they rewarded the people, and it was all this fancy BI stuff that I put measurement systems in, and I actually worked quite hard. It was like 2 or 3 months to get everything going across all the different areas, because we thought we wanted to have all the products benefiting from it. And so we put it in, and I think it was almost, 2 to 3 months later, he asked me to switch it off. And so of course, I mean, I wasn't really that impressed. And then in talking to him, he said what he started noticing on the second month was that if people could see almost sort of between the 10th and the 15th, if they could see that they weren't going to win, they stopped selling for that month. And they tried to get the sales into the next month. Okay, so then all of a sudden we had these games that were being played, and people respond to what they're being measured. And so yes, they loved the leaderboard, but what happened was that if person A made a really good sale up front, it just destroyed the morale of everyone else, and then they started planning for the next month. So one has to be careful in terms of how people respond to that. And
there's always a danger of using metrics to reward people without thinking of the consequences. Yeah. There's been numerous stories over the past 30, 40 years where you almost force a behavior that you had no thought about how it came about.
Right. And Drew, that's why I feel that, without bringing the metrics down from the top in terms of from an operating model point of view, looking at all the different aspects of your operating model, looking at the culture, looking at all of these different aspects, your measurements have to be quite wide and somehow related. So that if you see people dropping something, at some stage you're going to pick that up and understand the impact. So you're 100% correct. If you're bringing
actually applying an agility in tweaking those metrics as well.
Yes, you got to.
I know Warren Buffett, actually, when he started, he said he looks at what's being measured than the difference of what the culture is. He says the culture is defined by what's measured, not by what's written in the statements.
Yeah, 100%. And so culture is quite important, and this is what got me onto this. More and more convinced that culture is one of those things that really differentiates across your value disciplines. And if you're rewarding that culture, if you're rewarding across all those levels, and you're getting the right culture in terms of, let's say, customer intimacy, then the differences are quite big in terms of what the end game is. So you've got to be careful. Okay, so when we go to the North Star,
I have also a question.
Yes.
As you told that the response after 2 months was not what was expected, I think it is also necessary to understand the result of the measurement is useful for the future. So perhaps some process can be fixed and made better for all the people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he saw the impact and he made a quick decision, and he didn't think about how could he have added extra levels of metrics. This was his big metric, and I think at that time he had brought a sales consultant advisor in to lift up the sales, and that was his only focus. And he realized that he hadn't thought the whole thing through, and he said, well, put this on pause. And that was part of the BI project. I'm not sure how they're measuring it now.
Yeah, but sometimes you need to make this. I know Gillette had this also, where they had targets to measure every quarterly, and they started finding out their sales were dropping and climbing at the end of the quarter. It was a massive case study that was published, and what they found was customers actually started to notice when Gillette will give you actually discounts. So
No,
the company actually started impacting their measures. So they would wait until the end of the quarter to get those discounts.
Right.
And not order during the thing. And Gillette actually made a call to say they're going to stop the discount thing, so that and this was an external factor that the customers actually started noticing the patterns.
Right.
So these things actually does sometimes just you need to stop the measurement so that it doesn't impact your end bottom line. That stuff.
Yeah. And I suppose it's the important thing that Masood also raised is it shouldn't be a case of removing the metric or removing. It's about how do you reward appropriately across a wide range of metrics. So I think that certainly was my take home from a lot of that. How do you get the whole thing right and not just parts of it?
Just
Okay, so
Connie here, sorry.
Yes, Connie.
Just to come off, some of the Agile teams have been going to some Agile meetups in the UK here, and quite a few of them measure quite a lot, and they just don't show the measurements. So they put them in place, show them initially, and then they don't show them to the team anymore. Every now and then they make it visible, but just to avoid that it's being gamed or put undue pressure on the teams.
Right, which is interesting because it doesn't line up with things like the North Star and the OKR. And I've actually heard in some companies they've almost made it extremely visible, so everyone knows what the target is, what they're aiming for, and how that progression is happening. So it's an interesting area that one has to keep on working on, is to understand how people are responding to those metrics, and what is it that's making people having a negative response to the metric? Is it really focusing, or is it driving them to a point of writing more lines of code, which don't always necessarily create a better product? Or do they have the appropriate pirate funnel that shows the progress of that project or that agile team, and then they can see the blockage, and everyone can be aware of where their challenges are and to address those challenges. So it would be, did they give you any idea of the reason for not showing them, other than just people didn't like it, or?
So I don't think it was tied into, I don't think they used pirate funnel or anything. It was just about the performance of that particular team.
Right.
So I'm not sure how much it was linked to I can't remember all the details anymore. It's been quite a while ago.
Right.
But I think the talk was really about the Agile team and kind of developing their own version of Agile that works for that team.
Right.
By having measures in place to actually look how the team is performing. We had a whole range of different measures, so they were measuring all sorts of stuff.
Right.
I know one of the major things about OKRs, and we needed to get training on all of that, is you need to have counter metrics.
Yes.
So put it in an example. So I know data quality was the company I worked for, a major thing, that the quality of customers' data and all of that. And but they were measuring basically also the sales. So in this case, if you opened up an account for a customer, a salesperson would get that commission, bonuses, and all that is calculated. But what they found was that you open up a customer account, right, for a current account, and then you open up a different customer account for a credit card, because then it shows you opened up 2 customer accounts instead of linking them. So that's why the counter measures is important, to say that how do I measure my counter, and that should not go down. So at the end, if there was opening up too many customers with the same account numbers, then that would reflect negatively on your OKR too, on that measurement, and that will then also go back and impact. So that's actually one of the key importance to actually have your countermeasures that
Right.
also shouldn't go down.
Right, and I think, you know, when we look at these things together, and one of the areas that I work on is that the balanced scorecard, because of its breadth of measurement, you tend to find the countermeasures are there, right? So I've labeled it almost, when I use a balanced scorecard, that gives me my journey, my travel. You know, that's the guy that's going to keep all of these metrics and the different areas in place because I've got that wide thing. OKR is very good at flexibility in terms of what's your next period, what are you gunning for right now, and then your North Star gives you your destination. So there's almost this ability to bring them all together and have them being measured, but not always in everybody's face and saying, this is what we've got to do. And some of them become the important areas. So the North Star focuses on what's really important. And if you think of startup companies, it's going to be very different to established companies. In a startup company, in a tech company, or a tech platform, you really just want people on your platform. All right, so it may have a freemium level and you're trying to get people registered. You're not, at that stage, you're not trying to get them converted into paying customers. Of course, you want that, but you've got to get people onto the platform. And then you start looking at what's the churn or what's the conversion rate from free to premium. And then it's a case of what's my churn in terms of my custom and what's my churn in terms of my the free part. So you've got to be looking at all of those different areas and understanding what's important at that time. So your one metric that matters plus your North Star gives you a point in time. Oh, I've got a problem in this area. So for this next period, this is where we're going to focus on dealing with that issue. It doesn't mean you stop measuring on the other side. Okay. So the goals in terms of the North Star, it's high level, it's long term, it's aspirational. It's trying to get people to buy into the value proposition in terms of the purpose of the company. And that North Star does bring people together. And I've seen some good stories on that. And certainly we're working with 2 companies now on that. So I like to call it this journey in terms of how do you start? How do you go about using these metrics? So a lot of people are using it. So how do you go from nowhere to your North Star? I think you need to bring them all in. It's really helpful using the balanced scorecard. Once you've got the balanced scorecard down, you can now understand what your North Star is in line with your value proposition. So don't define a North Star without looking at the value proposition to the customer. Remember, it's when does the customer reach the end result? And use OKR to add flexibility and immediate timeframes. OKR is good with timeframes. This quarter, key results is outcomes, jobs to be done. That's a very helpful thing in terms of linking jobs to be done and OKRs. And then use a hierarchy to map across the departments and projects, and then use Pirate Funnel for the product. So what you will find is that you're going to have a hierarchy on the org structure, and then you're going to have a horizontal funnel for the products. And depending on how many you got, and you've got to work all of these together, and you've got to find a way in terms of in your presentation and your metrics into bringing this all together. So in summary, what we're saying is balanced scorecard goes across these critical areas: customer, financial, employee, and process, and balanced scorecard links them together. So that's very helpful. Okay, so employees tend to roll up into processes, which tend to roll up into customers, which tend to roll up into financial. That's your typical approach, but it depends on your value discipline. And then we have the North Star, which should be related to your value proposition, that relates to your customer. And then we've got OKRs in terms of what are the desired outcomes. Okay, and there's jobs to be done. And you've got 2 aspects of jobs to be done. What customer jobs to be done are you dealing with, and what employee jobs to be done are you looking for? Okay, so those are the 2 areas that you can apply the jobs to be done. Okay. Are there any questions or any observations on that?
Not from my side. It all makes sense to me, I have to say. I think at some point in time we might want to get a psychologist to come and talk about how we get people to change. Or not.
No, I got that, Drew. So you know Christine?
Yeah.
She's working with us on bringing the change into that metrics. So
that would be a great asset to this discussion.
So her focus is on culture.
Yes.
And if you measure culture properly, then you start picking up the issues that you're talking about and the change. So that's what she's focusing on, and that's why I like coming from the operating model, and culture is a aspect of the operating model. Okay, so I just wanted to go through this quickly and show you guys how important some of these areas are within the DMBOK. And one of the areas I wanted to point out in terms of the definition is that it's using all these different types of data. We know the 4 V's and the 5 V's and the value and stuff like that, is to find answers and insights for questions that are not known at the start of the analysis. Okay, and I believe the questions are known, and the questions align us from the metrics. So when we start to measure and we find out that these metrics are going wrong, then it's a case of why, what happened, what's going on, what should I do? Okay, so that's the important one that I wanted to raise there. It is understanding the relationships of data and the business. This is important. We don't just collect the data and then try to understand how it relates to the business, and then understanding the factors that affect the business. So those goals are important. What's interesting about the context diagram is when we look at the consumers of the end result of big data are all business, typically execs, the management side, right? The business partners, how do we measure, how do we know where the business is going? The executives in terms of, are we reaching our targets? And it's all the analytics is about, are we reaching our targets? Okay, so I had this thing that I put together in terms of the goal is finding answers and insights for questions, and the answers and insights are not known at the start of the analysis. So output, big data and analytics has got to produce insights, and the insights have to be focused on why did it happen? Okay, so the why did it happen could be, and that's how you ask the question, is not why did anything happen, why did we drop on our sales? Why did we drop on our performance in terms of our processes? What was the cause and effect? And then the next question is, what will happen if I keep on going like that? I need to understand the future effect of this process. And then when we get to answers and decisions, which answers must lead to decisions and actions and not a lot of disagreement, is what should I do? So you've got to keep on building the story. What happened is your BI. You then look at why did it happen. Then it starts to look at your cause and effect, your correlations and causation. What will happen is your forecasting and your predicting. What should I do is operational optimization. How do I improve in terms of what I'm doing and what are the possibilities? How to optimize the outcome? And more questions in what don't I know? So that goes to this scenario of, you know, you're busy running after a metric and things are happening on the side. You're wanting to be able to understand what it is that you're not understanding about the situation that you're in. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have seen this diagram in terms of data sophistication. We spoke about it the last time. We spoke about the different analytics, the different questions. I did point out that you can't answer this question without answering the previous questions. You certainly can't ask, what don't I know, when you don't even know what you do know. But all of this is a complexity and maturity that you work on. And the final thing that I wanted to introduce was really just this trying to do a simple diagram of these degrees of separation between your data, and this determines the risk of the big data. So the bigger the degree of separation, the bigger the risk of the data. Okay, so in this situation, we find out that the data is ahead of the business. So the data is looking at stuff that the business hasn't even got to and is not able to deal with at this point in time. And that may be social customer data, it may be market data, and you can see that some of this stuff will really drift quite far ahead, and it's not answering the metrics that the business have asked for. Okay, so just a slight separation. And if your data is behind here, you've also got a degree of separation. So if your orange part is behind the metrics, then you can't answer any of the metrics. So what you're trying to do is, with the metrics and the questions and the decisions, that what happened, what will happen, and then understand making decisions, you're trying to get this alignment, right? You're trying to align these things between what the business have decided they want to achieve and what the data is answering in terms of how they're achieving it and what the measurements are and what the problems are, so that you can continue to grow your pirate funnel, continuing to improve it and to reach your North Star.
Howard, what mechanisms would you put in place if there is a degree of separation in that the data or the technologies, the analytics that are being run are slightly ahead of the business? What techniques would you use to kind of educate business and open their eyes to what is possible?
Yeah, so Drew, this is, and I'd love to ask the people around here as to how many of you guys have been able to go to the business, specifically the business architects, and say, what are the core decisions that are made by the business on in response to the metrics? So that's when I start getting, and then it's a case of, well, do we have metrics? And some of them have this metrics right at the top level, at the SMO level, at the strategic level, but they haven't been able to connect it down to the department or the project. So then we have metrics and strategy that's right up top there, but we can't connect to that. We can't link the data to the metric. So what metric is going to help you change something that establishes stability within the economy? What is the metric? And then you can start see the differences between the data that I'm collecting and the questions and answers and decisions that I'm supporting to give them insight in terms of what's happening.
I guess I'm asking the question is it's a very real situation, but what is the way to open those discussions? I know you suggested talking to business architects, but I think practically there has to be maybe one or two pieces of low-hanging fruit that you could get somebody to say, oh, wow, let's listen a bit harder.
Okay, so if the data, and you can start seeing that where you're producing a lot of big data and insights and visualizations, and the business are saying, well, it's interesting, I probably didn't know about it, but it doesn't help me change anything. So those are the type of comments that you start hearing, that your data is not aligned with the metrics. When you get into active engagement, when they start saying, now I understand why this figure is dropping and I'm not getting these results, and it's linked to things that they want to measure and targets they want to achieve. So when you've got the data and you've got those insights that you're getting, you should be asking, to what metric, what does this align to? Does that answer your question, Drew?
To an extent it does, Howard. I'm seeing this as a kind of a communication, education, change management story as well, is to say, guys, did you know that you could actually be doing X, Y, and Z rather than P, Q, and R if you looked at things slightly differently, and there would be advantages?
Okay, so you tend to find, depending on your audience, right? If you're discussing this with business, and first of all, you're listening to the challenges that they're facing, and their constant comment is, and it was interesting, I was reading a paper by the PwC on digital transformation. They said some of the biggest the biggest problems and the biggest complaints they're getting from execs is that they don't know what's happening to the business and they don't know the direction the business is moving in. Okay? And they can't see it and they can't detect when things are going wrong. So they can't plan in terms of fixing it. Now, if an exec is saying that, then it's a case of then you have to say, well, do you have a proper North Star defined? Do your metrics align? Do you understand your critical data elements that support your metrics? Do you then understand the quality of the data that you've got to answer those questions? And then you go back and say, well, what questions are you asking of the data?
So maybe to jump in, one of the best ways I found for trying to align these is business understands usually the best when it comes to money, right? So how much they're spending. And IT, sometimes they're not really concerned about spending. They're more concerned about, how cool it is. So to say like social customer data, business is spending a lot on that and they're producing metrics, but it's not aligned.
They're not getting value out of the data or the analysis or the insights. So I'm producing insights.
Yeah, you're producing insights, but it's really, is the insights you're producing really worth what you're spending?
Yeah.
And one of the things I found was to kind of start, is to basically say, but you're spending so much and your value is that. So it's almost, it's almost metrics on the metrics. And what started to happen was more that business started saying, but we're going to give you less money or shut down this, which kind of shook the IT department to say, look, we need to now start actually showing why we want business to spend there, or business saying like, look, we're even there. And I think that's where you start to get the best sort of alignment between the departments when you actually talk money, because that's the end. We're spending on a Ferrari, but at the end, business just wants
So I do agree with you, Lawrence. What is important, as we've spoken through now and some of the times, is that sometimes your North Star is not just about money, but you are right. We tend to get the wake up, even in data management, when you're running these big data management programs and the business are saying, well, we don't see the value of it. You've got to be in some way linking the financial spend to the fact that they're achieving value. So the leading and the lagging indicators, those are important. But one has to also then start to measure customer satisfaction as well involved in that. So you're saying, well, guys, all my customer churn, and I was involved almost 4 months ago with a client that had a massive challenge in terms of their customer base. They were churning, they weren't sure when. We then discovered that on average it's a 2-year life cycle, and we then started to detect why that happened. But it was amazing that they had been doing a lot of big data, and they were never able to say, what is it that we need this big data for? And when you start to introduce and formalize the definition of metrics and get the business people to start putting down what they expect from the data. And I find that's some of the biggest problems, is I don't know what the business are expecting of this, what measurements are they expecting. So I'm looking for patterns within the data to justify that I'm doing a good job, to give them insights that they've never seen before. But when we start to connect on the metrics, when we start to bring the data in line with answering the metrics and driving those outcomes, and that's where I believe that link is on the metrics and the questions and the decisions around that. That's when we start to get a better alignment. And what is this data for? It's to drive that metric. That metric may be financial, it may be sales, it may be customer churn, it may be the value proposition on customer. It depends on what the...
I agree with you. So I never, for me, if you just measuring money, that should never be your North Star. But I look at it as a body. Money is the blood, right?
Sure.
So if I say I want to win a marathon, because it's going to make me feel good, and that's my North Star. If I don't have any blood in my in my body, then I can have the most beautiful intention, but I'm not going to run the marathon. I'm going to be dead. And that's how I kind of look at this, as saying it's not your North Star, but it should be your indicator to start aligning your stuff, because that's the easiest thing to measure at the end. How much money I'm putting in and how much money I'm spending, and what's the value of that. So that's usually how I take this, and how I try to get alignment between what they're spending on, because at the end, if they're spending a lot of money and infrastructure, like we was spending 700 million a year on just infrastructure, and that's not really then bringing a lot of value. The company just pushing out money, and could use it rather to get better products out. And if your alignment is to get for customers, I even say that's even, it's one of your core metrics, because if I'm ensuring that I'm not overspending money on metrics that, or let's say customer data or social data with alignment, then, I can actually bring that savings to my customer. My customers will actually save. I can bring out projects with better things to bring out for the customer, because I'm not spending on the wrong things. So at the end, it's kind of, may have to be your North Star, but it kind of should be your fuel to actually get to your North Star.
So I was just looking around this, and there was one slide where I actually said that the North Star should line up to your value proposition. And the value proposition is the thing that you're in business for, to drive, and the end result is money. I'm just looking for that slide in terms of where I had it, but you've got to link, when you do your business strategy and you have the value proposition to your customers in terms of why should they buy your product. If you constantly deliver on that value proposition, there is the net effect that your revenue is going to increase. So I think you're 100% correct. When you choose those metrics, or the one metric that matters, and the line up to the North Star, the end result has to be money, because that's typically why you're in business. Except if you're a regulator, then that's not the case. Then it's more of risk and other measurement factors, that reputational issues and stuff like that you got to deal with. So it is about choosing the right metrics, about being able to say that this spend is in relation to that outcome, and to relate it to there, and ensure that your measurement frameworks is holding all of this stuff together. And that's the trick where you got to come together, is you can't just have the OKRs, and in some cases you've just got the increase the sales. You've got to look at all the different other aspects in terms of justifying that infrastructural cost. If the infrastructural cost brings in more revenue and increases the value proposition, fantastic. If it doesn't, you're wasting your time. And I think that's similar to data management. If we're doing all this big data and stuff like that, and we're not improving the value to the business, well, we've all spent a lot of money, had a lot of fun in terms of tech, but we haven't delivered any value.
Exactly.
Yep. End of the day, I think we also from when we set up data management programs, we've got to understand what that value is. What's the business value? How do we align it, and how do we measure it? If we don't, we can do a lot of good stuff, and that's important. But are we seeing the necessary improvement on the value? Drew, Any comments from your side? Any comments? Anything someone would like to answer? Lawrence, thanks for that input. Appreciate it.
Howard, from my side, it really is that I think as individuals and as organizations, we are making progress, but we've got a long way to go. And I think the more we can learn to communicate as data professionals, the better we can communicate and collaborate with the likes of Christine and others, get them on our side rather than fighting them, I think we'll make progress.
That's an interesting comment, Drew. I actually had a CDO that was retrenched. A really good friend. He was a CDO. He's retrenched in November. He was the guy that almost 3 months ago we had to jump onto looking at the lifetime value, and he found those insights. But that was the last 3 months of his 5-year tenure, and only then did the business say, "Oh, jeepers, this is what's happening to us." The fixing it was a massive problem because they had to educate and uplift all sorts of areas and give value back. But he hit gold on the last 3 months, and then he was retrenched.
Yeah, as I say, you're never a hero in your own lifetime,
Yep. Guys, are there any questions? Anything that you'd like to ask before we have a break? Enjoy the Christmas.
Howard, from my side, as always, it's been great. And what I'd like to do is put it out to the audience today and to their colleagues. If you guys have got topics that you would like discussed, if you would like to do a presentation, a discussion, give us some input either at this big data special interest group or at one of the chapter meetings, we really, really would appreciate and welcome input. I know Howard really goes out of his way to put these things together. I know that he loves doing it. But it would be nice to have some fresh input, some fresh thoughts. You can drop me a line, you can drop Howard a line. We really welcome suggestions on what we can do, suggestions on how we improve these things. And maybe if there's things that we are doing that are not so clever, let us know that as well. We're big boys. We can take it.
Thank you, guys.
For me, that's it. Anybody else?
All good from my side. Thanks very much.
Take care, Lawrence. Have a good one.
Thank you, you too.
Cheers, man.
Howard, thank you.
Yes, Willem.
I'm definitely going to watch the recording again. There's a lot of information here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think it's important.
You can watch the previous one as well. Watch the both.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll get on that too. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Willem. How are things going on your side? Christmas time coming up, or you guys just knocking on?
Knocking on. So I'm working for the US. So they have Thanksgiving, and that's that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Howard, have a good evening.
Enjoy. Cheers, guys. Cheers, everybody. Thank you very much.
Cheers, bye.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Bye.
So, cheers. Take care.
Yeah, Pelly, that was a good one. I think it was very interesting to get Christine in on her side of it, because I've always found that the challenge comes in is that
it's the change.
I think we don't always articulate these things as well, and people like Christine and others that are strong in the change management side have just got a knack of doing it. That's what they're trained to do.
Yeah. So, Drew, one of the things that we did bring in, and a topic that she spoke on the other day was, with the big data and with these different types of decisions, I don't know if you've seen the Cynefin diagram. It's called the uncertainty framework, and it all measures your level of uncertainty in terms of the cause and effect.
Okay, no, I haven't seen it yet.
Now, the interesting aspect of that is that depending on almost these quadrants that you're in, you choose a different team. Your team structure is very different.
The makeup of your team.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. I would buy that.
Yeah. So she's put together this thing of, so for example, if you're in a well-defined cause and effect, then you have a set of business rules and everyone adheres to the business rules. If you see this effect, this is the cause, and let's get it done. This is how you sort it out. And so there's a bit of a monkey see, monkey do type of thing. And you can even move in digital decisioning then, right, where you can start getting machines to make those things. If you have a complicated environment where you need expert advice to explain the cause, you need the advice, and then you can use confirmatory analytics to confirm that. So there you choose an expert. You don't want 20 experts because they give you different techniques and different ways of doing it. And then you have a team of people that can collect the data and understand what it is. When you go into the next quadrant, which is what they call complex, there is no right answer. So in that scenario, you don't have experts, you just have people that really understand it, and then you probe. And you use a lot of this hypothesis testing. Test it, check, do people respond? No, they don't. Test again. No, they don't. Test again. So you've got a very different team structure to that of the complex or the complicated and that of the obvious.
Yeah, and I think that people's appetite for risk, as well as whether it is the culture of the organization is a blame culture or a celebrate wins culture, would make a big difference to that as well.
Yes. So really, depending on where you are, you got to change that culture in terms of, and you got to ensure you got the right leadership.
Yeah.
Right. So if you've got the wrong leadership and the guys are hammering you, but there's no right answer, you're in for a hiding.
Yeah, it's like somebody saying you have to be at your desk at 8 o'clock, and you ask them why. They can't tell you why, but you got to be there at 8.
No. And then the last area is interesting as well, and that's the chaos area, where you can analyze data till the cows come home. You're not going to get an answer. Now you need a person with strong leadership. They're going to make a decision and then look at the consequences. Use data to sense what's happening, and then everyone's got to buy into it. They can't start debating and say, "Oh, but we don't agree." And what about this? And yeah, you may be right, but that's not the thing. We've made a decision.
Yeah.
And so each area has, in a way, a different culture.
Absolutely. And within areas of a business, by the very nature of what the areas do, the participants have got different characteristics.
Yeah. And so you got to be building your team, you got to be building the culture, you got to be building the leadership, you got to be building the method of work to focus on that type of scenario. Now, Now it comes into big data as well, because different decisions and cause and effects have different technologies.
Yep.
And you can't now put a team together that just tries to do the same thing the same way for all the different areas.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. So that's what people have got to learn. They've got to learn that everything is not this type of analytics, this type of approach, and this is the way we do stuff. No, it's do you understand the relationship between the cause and effect and the state of your information?
We've always done it this way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, no, it's been good. I thought it was a great session.
Cool, man. Have a good one.
And you guys too, eh? Yeah, have fun. Don't get up to too much.
Man.
All right.
Bye.
Good. Bye.
Cheers, everybody.